All right, I wasn't super happy with my original edit of Psalm 140. So let's go back and look at Psalm 140 again, this time calling it their lips, a phrase that is literally going to come up in some form 2 times in the passage, once again at the beginning and towards the end. However, it's not going to be at the beginning and the end of the entire psalm. It's going to be at the beginning and the end of a section in which the psalmist is asking for relief from those who spin mischief through their chatter or their lips, as he's going to go on to confidently state that no matter what the spin is or what the adversity he has to face, he is still confident that God will look out for his servants, and in particular, his servants who display 4 characteristics of God's people. Beginning, however, in the first 3 verses or so, he is going to ask God to deliver me from evil men, as we have specifically stated in verse 3, those who mischaracterize the truth through the mischief of their lips. It's specifically going to say, under their lips is the venom of asps, as it'll go on in verses 4 and 5 to ask God to guard him from the traps that the wicked will set, understanding that there are 2 characteristics of the wicked he's bringing out in this psalm, 2 among many others, but generically the way they use their mouth and the way that they covertly set traps for adversaries. Understanding that verses 6 and 7 are going to go on to talk about the ways in which David is first confident that God will protect him. In other psalms, we've seen the way in which he thanks God for training his hands for war, but David, in his wisdom as a man of God and a soldier, realizes that, as we often say, there are too many variables to simply be confident in the skill of his hands. So he thanks God for providing him protection, not the least of which being from the kinds of enemies he's describing in these chapters. Enemies that aren't quite as susceptible to lining up face to face on the battlefield. Why? Because they fight through slander and covert deception, the kind that you don't necessarily see on a battlefield. As he is going to go on and shift in verse 8 to say, as opposed to the things that he's asking God to affirmatively do to protect him, he's going to ask him not to grant the wishes or the desires of the wicked for a purpose. In the second half of verse 8, he's going to say, do not further their evil plot, or they will be exalted, something that we focused on in the original Psalm 140 discussion. But he is going to add to that by, in verses 9 through 11, asking God to let certain things play out for them. As we mentioned in the title, verse 9, as for the head of those who surround me, let the mischief of their lips overwhelm them. As we said in the last 2 verses, he is going to then transition into talking about the ways in which, no matter what his adversaries seem to be able to manifest or manipulate, he's still confident that God is going to look out for his servants, in particular 4 types of servants, or servants who seem to display 4 characteristics. Verse 12, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and will execute justice for the needy. Going on to talk about character traits. Surely the righteous shall give thanks to your name, and the upright shall dwell in your presence. And the thing I kind of wanted to discuss, apart from that whole concept of understanding that David is not simply praying for God to be on his side. He understands that if he is going to ask God to enact or execute vengeance on an enemy, there is a context for that request that goes beyond David's personal gripe. And so he has a perspective beyond himself, upon which he is basing his request to God to deal with the wicked. Beyond David understanding the larger why it was important for God to deal with the wicked in this chapter, he seems to have once again woven in that theme of how God should deal with the wicked. Once again, a how that seems to be super similar to what we'll see Christ saying in the New Testament, specifically in the Sermon on the Mount, when he makes a simple statement that we have probably heard since we were yay high. With the measure we use, it will be measured back to us. This time, David reminding us that we do not have to be preoccupied or unduly frustrated to the degree we see those who seem to be getting away with spinning versions of the truth that just ain't true. David quite possibly showing us the value in understanding the old law, understanding that he was a king noted for his administration of justice according to God's law. He quite possibly understood or had in ready recall the penalty for a false witness under the old law. And for one who went into court bearing false witness, especially one who went into court knowingly bearing false witness, the penalty under the law was that the thing they intended for the victim of their false witness was the thing that was to be done to them. So David is not simply making up some penalty that he would like God to administer on his adversaries who were spinning the truth. David's prayer here in this psalm is possibly based upon his understanding of what God is already willing to do to those who enjoy engaging in conflict by spinning the truth into something that just ain't true. Or, as the psalm specifically says, those who enjoy getting even with others through the mischief of their lips.